Hey guys, so the ban list finally came out, and luckily for us, Anaconda did not get banned, so I thought I'd bring an updated deck profile that I'll be using once the new list comes into effect. Now for those of you that play Master Duel and perhaps exclusively Master Duel, while some cards in this deck will be different because the game uses a different ban list, the actual Cyber Dragon cards will be the same, so my explanations would still apply to you. Now I am going to bring a combo video as well very shortly after this video where I'll outline all of the basic key plays you need to know when playing this deck, so stay tuned and let's get right into it. So starting with the main deck, we of course have the 3 Cyber Dragon cores. So this is basically the most important card in the deck. It's the card that you want to hard draw all the time. Basically it searches a Cyber Dragon spell or trap on the summon, and the search effect is mandatory on the summon, which is very bizarre. So it is going to be a hand trap magnet. You can't just choose not to activate it, you have to activate it, unfortunately. And other than that, the other effect is when it's in the graveyard and your opponent controls a monster and you don't, then you can banish this from the graveyard and special summon a Cyber Dragon monster from the deck. Typically it becomes Naxxir, which can then revive like Rampage or Nova or Infinity, and I'll get to all of that when it comes to the actual combo video that I'll bring shortly. And then the next Cyber Dragon card is of course the 3 Cyber Dragon Hers. Basically the primary reason for this card is just to be pitched for Galaxy Soldier, so that the soldier will summon and then this will add a Cyber Dragon and then the soldier will add another soldier, and then you can just do that again and bring that out, then go into Nova Infinity. It does have a second effect where you can change it to level 5 if this card is special summoned, and then if you use that effect you are locked into machines. That effect almost never comes up. I mean, if you saw one of my recent Master Duel replay videos, I actually do use that effect in an awkward situation where I had no other way of going into Nova or Infinity, but that effect almost never comes up. The next is I play 2 Naxxir. This is very standard, by the way, in terms of the ratios. So the 2 Naxxir, so like I said earlier, it's really there to bring back like a Nova or Infinity or Rampage, because it has to have a 2100 attack. Or 2100 defense. The other effect, and if you use that revival effect, then you are locked into special summoning machines. Now its other effect that's also very useful is that it can special summon itself from hand if you pitch a monster, and so that effect, you're not locked into machines if you only use that effect. And I typically do that just to get an extra body on board when I get interrupted, for example, and then I just have to like turbo into Anaconda or something. So very, very good card. You don't really need 3 because normally it's not something you have to like hard open or anything. It's more so for just to come out of the deck through core, but sometimes you do also search it through emergency, or maybe you send with like Rampage the Hers and Naxxir to get access to this, but it really depends on the situation. And then we of course have the 3 OG Cyber Dragon. So that of course is primarily so that it comes out of machine dupe. It's not something I mean, if you hard draw 1, that's actually fine. It gives you that free body, and especially when it comes to something like, when your opponent has like Mechaba, for example, which happens a lot, you can contact fuse it away for free because Mechaba is a machine. And same with like, let's say Appaloosa, it's an easy just out to Appaloosa, just contact fuse it away from Mega Fleet. So it's nice if you only hard draw 1, but if you draw multiple, then that's just like really bad. And again, primarily you just want to come out of the deck through the machine dupe. Next, for the other light machines is so it's the 2 Galaxy Soldiers, like I mentioned. Primarily, I would say the standard ratio is 2. Some people play 3. I mean, it's up to you, but really, I think 2 is all you need. It just to turbo you into Nova Infinity, and it's really just kind of like the honorary Cyber Dragon, as people call it. And of course, the other final light machine is the Jizukuru. Basically, I'm seeing this a lot in the comments, people asking why we play it. So it is searchable off of Cyber Repair Plant because that searches a light machine. And so essentially what you're doing, for those players that are new, Kaijus, you actually tribute it and you give it to your opponent. So you're basically getting rid of your opponent's like problematic monster. Let's say something like Dragoon or some other like big boss monster. And then after you give that to them, there's multiple ways for you to clear it. It's a machine, so that means you can just get rid of it, contact fuse it away for Chimeric Fortress Dragon, which I'll show you later in the extra deck. You can also suck it up with Cyber Dragon Infinity. And another thing to make a habit of, make sure to summon this thing on your opponents under either of the 2 extra monster zones, zone 2 or 4. That way, and I'll show you again later in the extra deck, when Relinquished Anima, when you summon it, you can also suck it up with that, and then it becomes 3300 attack. So that's why you play this card. Next, we have hand traps, just the 3 Ash. And prior to like this ban list, I was also trying out some other like lineups, like for example testing out Droll in the main, and how Ash, it didn't seem as great. Although at the same time I realized, for example, Fusion Destiny is just so common. Now it's put to 2, it's a little bit, it's going to be a bit less common, but still going to be played. So it's like the only card that can stop that, really. And it's generic. It's going to hit a lot of pretty much all decks. So I decided to still use Ash. And then the final 2 monsters is the Dragoon package. This of course is banned in Master Duel in terms of Dragoon, and DP is not legal yet. You can also consider using the DP package, which essentially will be Destiny Hero Celestial and Destiny Hero Dasher. And so the reason why I went back to Dragoon is that because we were going second deck, I realized, Dragoon's pop and also burn is very, very huge for us. Now, if we were forced to go first, I admit, I think DP is better because, aside from the pop, the materials are obviously much better. You can get free draws and a free special summon. But going second, this deck, it's kind of surprising. It can have a hard time outing multiple high attack monsters. Because, for example, Infinity will suck up one high attack monster if it's in attack mode. And trying to bring out Seeger on top of Rampage, it's actually not as easy as it would be. You would need a bit more extenders than you would see in a standard hand. And so being able to pop just 2 monsters with Dragoon is really big, and the burn damage really helps with OTKs, and so that's why I went with Dragoon. And I know a lot of you may not even want to play Dragoon or DP, and that's fine. As you saw in my Master Duel deck profile, because those cards are not available, I don't even play them, and it's fine. You can essentially just get rid of them and just not play it. It's totally up to you. And then the spell, so we're obviously going to start with the Red Eyes Fusion. This would be Fusion Destiny, for example, if you play DP, or if you don't play either of those packages, you can just play the Cyberload Fusion, which is specific to Cyber Dragons essentially. And the reason I don't play Cyberload Fusion when I play Dragoon or DP is because then that would make it 3 spells, right? Red Eyes, for example, Red Eyes Fusion, Overload Fusion, Cyberload Fusion, and I find that gets a little clunky, especially when, Cyberload Fusion is great when you have banished materials, and because I prioritize using this through Anaconda rather than Overload Fusion, I find I'm not banishing as much. Basically the only banishing is from the Cybernetic Overflow, the trap card that I'll show you later, as well as Core's effect. So that's why I don't play Cyberload Fusion when it comes to playing Dragoon or DP, but if you're not playing those, then you can play Cyberload Fusion. And then the actual Cyber Dragon spell cards, we have the 3 Emergency Key Searcher in our deck. Obviously Drytron uses it, and what's interesting is that ever since Drytron became popular, because no one is going to Ash Cyber Emergency when they're playing against Drytron, I find they're not, so when I'm starting off with this, they're not Ashing it anymore, and sometimes that could end our turn. I mean, sometimes it's fine if they Ash, but yeah, it's kind of interesting how things have shifted because of Drytron. I find that a little funny. And so it searches a Cyber Dragon monster, essentially any one of them. So the other important Cyber Dragon spell card is the Repair Plant. You need to have a Cyber Dragon monster in grave, or well, rather to be specific, Cyber Dragon, but all the baby Cyber Dragons become Cyber Dragon in the grave. And then once it's there, you can activate it, add a light machine. Typically you're adding Galaxy Soldier to do your Hers Galaxy Soldier play. Like I said earlier, you can also search the Jizakuru with this card, and it's pretty flexible. And the other thing is, it does have multiple effects. You can also instead choose to return a light machine back into the deck, but the thing is, that effect you're never going to use. But if you have at least 3 Cyber Dragons in graveyard, then you can actually use both effects. So essentially, it doesn't come up too much, but when in a grind game where you actually have enough materials in the grave, what you could possibly do is, for example, you could return, maybe a Cyber Dragon so that your machine dupe becomes live again, or more importantly, when I ever use that effect, is just to return back the Seeger back into the extra deck so that I can go into it again, so that I can enable OTKs, and it only kind of happens in the grind game. So you're essentially only using it for the add effect. The other important cyber spell is the Ref System. This is essentially like a Monster Reborn, except you can also special from hand, but if you're specialing from hand, it has to be the original Cyber Dragon, whereas if you're specialing from grave, obviously the baby Cyber Dragons are all Cyber Dragon in grave, so you can bring them back. It actually does not target either, so let's say your opponent, like DD Crow's like your only Cyber Dragon hers in the grave and they think it softs it. If you actually had an original Cyber Dragon in hand, then you would just resolve it and special that instead. And also the cool thing is that special summon monster cannot be destroyed by card effect, so this can be kind of useful when your opponent, when you know your opponent has some kind of card that's gonna pop, let's say like a punishment, and you could, for example, like if you special a baby Cyber Dragon with this and then use machine dupe and they try to pop your baby Cyber Dragon, then it's not going to pop and then you would be able to resolve the dupe. So that can be pretty useful sometimes. So the next 3 really powerful spells, Machine Duplication. This card is nuts if you actually have the target and can resolve it. So that's kind of the downside with this deck, when it can be pretty bricky, and it sucks when you draw this and you don't have any targets. But you know, when it does, especially when you're forced to go first, it's what really enables you to actually set something up. And it's not once per turn. I mean, I guess maybe part of that is because it's just an old card. So because the Cyber Dragons, the baby Cyber Dragons, are Cyber Dragon on the field, as long as their effects are not negated, that's why when you use this on a baby Cyber Dragon, it's going to bring out the 2 original Cyber Dragons, the 2 level 5s, and then you can go into Nova Infinity, and so it makes it much easier to facilitate your plays, especially OTKs. And so just make sure though, like for example, if you're, let's say you summon Cyber Dragon Core and it gets negated, like something like Imperm or Effect Failure, and then it is no longer Cyber Dragon on the field. So if you use this on them, then it can only special out the baby Cyber Dragons. So just keep in mind of that. And yeah, but otherwise it's a very good card. Another really powerful spell in this deck is Overload Fusion. This is something you can send through Anaconda and bring out Chimeratech Rampage. It's like your OTK enabler. And you are basically banishing materials from grave to special summon out, essentially, Chimeratech Rampage. And yeah, you know, it's a very old historic card. It's still really good, and I don't know what the deck would do without it. On to the other generic staple spells. We have the 3-Pod Prosperity, obviously an expensive card, and I get asked this a lot, you know, what would you play if you don't have Prosperity? I typically, like, for example, I would have at least one different extender. So like I used to play like Foolish Burial, for example, when I didn't have Prosperity. And then the other 2, you can just change it for like other going second cards. But this card is really good in this deck. I get it, you deal half damage that turn, but you know, because of the brickiness this deck can endure, you know, it doesn't matter if you deal half damage. It's better to do half damage and be able to actually set up something and, you know, have plays than not being able to play at all and you just die next turn. And so and to be honest with you, I've actually OTK'd under Prosperity sometimes, but to do that, you have to hard draw Overload Fusion essentially. But you know, there's no reason for you to try to like always try to kill your opponent right away. And I know this deck is technically an OTK deck, but you'd be surprised. It's a very grindy deck, and you're better off just playing that game as well a lot of instances than trying to go for the kill. So when we get to the extra deck section, I can tell you which cards I typically banish off of Prosperity, because I get asked that like 5 times every video. So yeah. And the next, just other going second generic staples, it is Lightning Storm. Very good for back removal, but it's also flexible because it can also hit monsters. And especially with, presumably Eldritch might be pretty popular, especially at least at the beginning of the format, and who knows, maybe it just dies down. But you know, I do want I've been main decking back removal the whole time since I've been playing this deck, and so you can, it's an expensive card, I get it, so you can replace these with like Evenly Match, and that might work actually really well, especially for example like if Eldritch is actually going to be really popular, and if they actually play that Heavenly Prison card where it protects like your sets from being destroyed, then Evenly Match would work better in that instance. But either way, you know, you want some kind of board wipe cards. And speaking of other going second cards, I do also have the Triple Droplet, very useful. It's like Dark Ruler's fine too, or even Forbidden Chalice really. And so it's great because especially when you play Dragoon, it makes like you can still OTK, for example, like Dark Ruler, you don't deal damage, and kind of similar to Prosperity, like that's still fine if you can't deal damage, as long as you can clear the board and set up a little bit of your own. But Droplet, it is kind of nice that, you know, not only do you like half their attack, you still negate it, and you can still deal damage that turn. And like I said, when paired with Dragoon with like a lot of pops, especially against decks where you're kind of using this and they might have like high attack monsters, and that's a lot of burn damage that you're going to be able to deal with Dragoon. And so this card's really good, especially with now that Scythe is still not banned. This protects, or this provides another way of possibly stopping that effect from resolving. And the last spell, that something I've never bothered to play in this deck, is Call by the Grave, even when it was at 3, because, you know, for like obviously traditionally this card's used to stop hand traps, and for a going second deck, I just never felt that this card was worth it. But now the reason why I'm going to try it out is a big difference is that now, because for example DP, Destroyer, Phoenix Enforcer, and Scythe, those are 2 very common cards in a lot of decks, and this will still hit them as well on top of hand traps. So in the rare instance where I actually do draw it, like it's probably bound to have some kind of utility where it does hit either of the Destroyer, Phoenix Enforcer, or Scythe, or just like a hand trap. So I am going to try it out, and you know what, it's there. I'm not going to rely on it, but like it's just there. And finally, for the traps, we have the 3 Imperms as our basically 6 hand traps in the main deck. Really good card, very versatile, good for going first or second, which is very handy in this deck in the instance where you are forced to go first, for example. And also underrated, it can kind of like negate the floodgates, for example. You know, you set it in that same column and then you activate it. Now that Imperial Order is gone, that's much better. But yeah, still very good card, and yeah, one of my favorite cards of all time. And then the other last trap is the Cybernetic Overflow, something you can search off of core. Very good. For those of you that are not familiar with this card, basically you can banish Cyber Dragon monsters from the hand, field, or grave of different levels. And when you're banishing from the hand, it has to be the original Cyber Dragon, okay? But from the grave and the field, it can be the baby Cyber Dragons as well. So typically, at least with my build max, you're gonna be able to pop 3 cards, but it does not banish for cost, and it also does not target, so it's really handy, and it's very powerful. Even though we're going second deck, you know, you do have to like you may not kill your opponent in a lot of instances, and you need that kind of like follow-up so you can stop them from clapping back. And so this is something that's really good, especially when you're also forced to go first. This card, you know, popping like your opponent's normal summon for a lot of decks, that can kind of like end their turn. So that is 43 cards in the main deck, and I know some of you are going to be triggered by that number, but I have always liked 43 when it comes to like playing Dragoon or DP, just like because, you know, you have the 3 cards that are cards that you don't really want to draw in this deck, like the Dark Magician Red Eyes and the Red Eyes Fusion. And 43, honestly, it works perfectly fine compared to 40, so, you know, do what you want, but it's been working very well for me, and it's what I did when I topped the YCS. I also played 43, never been a problem. Okay, so onto the extra deck, and starting with the links, we have Almirage, which is very critical in this deck. Basically, it gets your normal summon baby Cyber Dragon into the grave so that you can get your Repair Plant live and add like your Galaxy Soldier, for example. Then we have the Link Spider. Basically, this is only for when the Nova gets Nibiru'd, because that's typically when they can activate Nibiru, and then Nova will trigger, bring out the, let's say, Mechaba or Chimera Tech Rampage, and then you can convert the Nibiru token into this, and then you would turbo into Anaconda and bring out Dragoon. Now, if you're not playing Dragoon or DP, there's no reason for you to play this card because you're just going to bring out straight up Chimera Tech Rampage with Nova, and that's going to be it for you. And so next would be the Relinquished Animal. So this card, it requires a level 1, so essentially hers or Naxxur, and like I said earlier in the video, you can use it to, like, let's say, suck up the Jizuku that you give to your opponents in zones 2 or 4. Also the Nibiru token, when you summon it, just make a habit of summoning in those 2 zones so you can suck it up with Anima. And so another utility with this card is that it is a spellcaster, so in the rare instances when your opponent has Secret Village of spellcasters and you cannot play spells unless you control a spellcaster, I go into this, and that's how I kind of start my plays again and pull those games off. The next card is Verde Anaconda. I'm very glad it's not banned because for our deck, we use it way before even Dragoon or DP was released. Basically, you're using it, you know, pay cost, pay 2,000 life points, send a fusion spell, and copy that effect. I do prioritize using copying Red Eyes Fusion to bring out Dragoon, but in an open board, you would send Overload Fusion instead and bring out Chimera Tech Rampage. So it's a very key card in this deck, and I'm just glad it's alive for now. The next link is the Cyber Dragon Seeker. Basically, it's there to beef up your Rampage to 42 and enable OTKs. A lot of people get confused because the text is a little bit confusing, I admit. Basically, whatever other machine monster this card's pumping, like that monster is still going to deal damage, as in usually Rampage. It's just that the card Seeker itself, that he's not going to deal any damage. So typically, like, you would use this to like attack over defense position monster if you have to, because it's not going to deal damage anyways. But this card really enables OTKs. In terms of the Xyz, we play the 2 Nova and 2 Infinity. I play this ratio for the longest time since I played this deck. Essentially, for example, when I revive with Naxxur, I like to bring back the Nova instead so I can overlay into Infinity so it has a material on the summon. The downside though is that if I used Prosperity that turn, I typically banish the second copies of Nova and Infinity, so I can't do that and I have to straight up bring Infinity instead. I do actually find that there are enough times where I have to go into the second Nova because the first one, let's say, gets like, I don't know, popped, and I still have extenders to go into another one and just continue my plays. If your opponent plays Dogmatica Invoked and they use Maximus's effect, you could also send this and then it will trigger and you can bring out Mechaba or Chimera Tech Rampage, so it's there. The other Xyz is Zeus. So if you saw my Master Duel replays, it does come up decent amount of times, at least in the kind of like quote-unquote pure builds. When I'm playing Dragoon or DP, I do find that I don't go into this as much because I'm prioritizing special link through Anaconda like the Dragoon or DP, and then you can't special summon anymore. But this card's really good for clearing fields and also, you know, especially setting it up against normal summon reliant decks. And the cool thing is it is actually a machine, so that means if you use like Naxxur's revival effect and you're locked into machines, it doesn't matter, you can still go into this thing. And its second effect, where, you know, let's say a card you control is destroyed, then you can actually attach hers to Zeus, and then when you detach again for its nuke effect, like, you'll be able to trigger hers, and it's a really good feeling. Onto the fusions, we have Chimera Rampage. It's like our OTK enabler. It's really cool because, you know, on the fusion summon, it's gonna pop spells and traps up to the fusion materials used. And then its other really good effect, and arguably the best effect, is like you can send 2 late machines. So typically you're sending like hers and core, and then hers is gonna trigger, and you add back the core from grave to hand. And I'll cover that in the combo video. And then after you send those 2, it attacks that many more times. So essentially, it's gonna attack 3 times in total. So that would be like 63 on its own, but when paired with Seeger, then, you know, it's double that amount, right? And also remember, even if you're going first and there's no battle phase, you can still activate that effect of sending from the deck. It's not like Megalo when some people compare that's different. That has to send for cost, and you cannot do that if you don't have a battle phase, but this one you can. So keep that ruling in mind. The next Chimera Tech monster is the Mega Fleet. Mega Fleet is really cool because it can contact fuse away monster in your opponent's extra monster zone. So something like Appaloosa, or like, let's say like Hermetic Seal. They're probably going to use Hermetic Seal's effect, but it will force them to use it at least if you like special summon Cyber Dragon. And the Mega Fleet, also keep in mind, it requires a Cyber Dragon monster, which means it can also be like the baby Cyber Dragons. Obviously the baby Cyber Dragons are also Cyber Dragon on the field anyways, but in another instance is that if you set your baby Cyber Dragon, in which case, you know, it would still be only considered as a baby Cyber Dragon, you can still contact fuse away your set with your opponent's monsters in the extra monster zone for Mega Fleet. However, you cannot say the same for Fortress, because this actually requires the original Cyber Dragon. So while face up, of course, the baby Cyber Dragons are Cyber Dragon, so that you can just contact fuse it away anyways. But if your baby Cyber Dragon got negated, something like Imperm or Veiler, then they're no longer treated as Cyber Dragon. That means you cannot contact fuse into Fortress with like your opponent's machine with that. So just keep that in mind. And a very weird thing with this card is that because it just says Cyber Dragon on the field, and it doesn't have to be Cyber Dragon as a monster, you can actually contact fuse away if your opponent has like an original Cyber Dragon in like their spell and trap zone, for example, because they like equipped it with like their anima. You can actually still contact fuse it away for Fortress. It's really weird. I've done it before, but kind of interesting. The next fusion is a next boss monster in Dragoon. Really good in terms of the pop and burn, like I said earlier, but also because when we're forced to go first, it just provides us with that extra negate alongside Infinity, and it's just like, really, it just wins games on its own. And the last fusion is the Mechaba. So that comes out of Nova only when it gets, for example, either like Nibiru, or like you send it off of Maximus or something else when your opponent like sends this to the graveyard somehow. So traditionally, honestly, I don't ever use its effect. Like it's not really on the field for long, because like I said, if it's like Nibiru, then I'm just converting the Nibiru token into Spider, and I'm just bringing this out with Nova, and then I just link into Anaconda and bring out Dragoon. So that's kind of all that it's good for. Now, in terms of what I banish for Prosperity, I typically banish 6. So for example, it'd be like the Anima, the Spider, and the Mechaba. And then I also banish the second copy of Nova and Infinity. And the last one, it really depends on the matchup and like your hand. For example, like if Zeus isn't really useful against the deck, you can consider getting rid of that. If you don't find you're gonna need Seeger, that's also another option. If your opponent doesn't really special summon in the extra monster zone, you can just get rid of Mega Fleet instead. And with Almirage, you have to be very careful if you're banishing this, because it can really mess you up very badly. But let's say if your opponent does already have a monster in the extra monster zone that you can contact fuse away and get your baby Cyber Dragon engraved, then instead you can banish the Almirage. So it kind of really depends. And I almost always banish 6 unless I open multiple Prosperities. Then I would just do 3 at a time. That is, of course, if my hand's really bad and I have to get going, then no matter what, I would just have to like banish 6. But you know, it's a really good card, and this is typically what I banish. And finally, onto the side, and this is something that's probably going to change quite a bit as I move into the actual format, is of course the 3 Nibiru. I think that's pretty standard. I think you need to have this for now. It's just good against combo decks, and it's really good card. It's also a light monster actually, so worst case you can actually pitch it for Galaxy Soldier if you have no other plays, and so I've done that before. The other is Droll, of course, has been very popular for a while now. It just very, very high impact in terms of just stopping your opponent from like adding cards from the deck again. Very useful against a lot of decks usually. And I'm trying out the 2 lands here for now. I'm gonna respect Phantom Knights a lot. Ideally, I wish I could play 3, but you know what? It's been pretty good whenever you resolve it. Another high impact card, where just another hand trap that can kind of like shut things down for the whole turn, and it's just really, really impactful. On to some back row removal. I have the 2 Cosmic Cyclones, as well as the Feather Duster and the Red Reboot, really the most powerful of them all. I do kind of prefer to have like 3 Cyclones, for example, especially like even for Scythe. But then again, I also have like Droplet for Scythe, the Called by the Grave, and technically also Imperm if they shotgun like the DPE effect for some reason. And so yeah, you know, I think this is good. So on top of these 4 and the 3 Lightning Storms in the main, that makes it 7 cards dedicated to back row. And so I really miss Red Reboot at 3. It was just so good. But I think this has worked out quite well for me. And lastly, for going first options, I do always have the 3 summon limits. And for those of you new to Cyber Dragons, you want to have at least 3 cards dedicated to going first. I actually also had Imperial Order on top of this, but that's banned. And for good, I'm honestly happy. I don't care if I can't use it anymore. I hated that card even when I used it. I'm glad it's gone. And just the 3 summon limits, good enough. And another good thing, at least for now, I don't know how the format's actually going to be, but for example, against Sword Soul and Drytron, I had to force myself to go first because they're just too good. Like Protoss is just too good. It's kind of like essentially VFD. I had to go first, and so that's where like Imperial Order came up. And same with Drytron as well. They're just too good. And Drytron Spy is still pretty good, not gonna lie. But at least for Sword Soul, they don't have Protoss anymore. So hopefully, I don't have to force myself to go first. As much as I was doing before, and Summon Limit in itself is really good. You have some other going first options. You have, you know, typical cards like Anti-Spell Fragments. Heat Wave is another card that's been kind of suggested as well. It's basically like you play it as it's the first card in your main phase, and then like neither of you can summon basically, and then it's just like your turn rolls around and then you can try to kill them. But I prefer a more Floodgate option that's kind of like long lasting, because I just find it's worked well for me. And even under summon limit, let's say like your monsters get destroyed, you could like banish the core, special the Naxxur can summon the Infinity, and then now that's still 2 summons, and Infinity can like suck up an attack position monster and kind of just like grind from there. So I've always liked this card. It's something I've been playing for a very long time, and yeah, I think a lot of Cyber Dragon players are also running this card as well. Alright guys, so that was it for the deck profile. Hope that helped for those of you that are new to the deck. Like I said, I'll bring a combo guide for this deck very shortly, and in the meantime, make sure to check out my replay videos to learn how to play the deck. Take care guys.